New details about Farrah Fawcett's son, Redmond O'Neal. Farrah Fawcett was once America's golden girl, a television icon whose smile lit up screens and whose beauty defined a generation. But behind the glamorous images and unforgettable roles, there was a personal life marked by turbulence and tragedy. With actor Ryan O'Neal, she had one child, a son named Redmond. To many, Redmond should have been blessed by his parents' fame and fortune. Instead, his life became a cautionary tale of addiction, violence, and squandered opportunity. Even after Farrah's tragic death, Redmond could not escape the spiral of destruction. Now, years later, new details about his troubled life have emerged, painting an even darker picture of what became of the son of Hollywood royalty. This is the story of Redmond O'Neal in 10 parts, a story of privilege gone wrong, of love and loss, and of demons that even the brightest legacy could not erase. The shadow of famous parents. Redmond James Fawcett O'Neal was born in 1985, the only child of Farrah Fawcett and Ryan O'Neal. From the moment he entered the world, his life was shaped by fame. His mother was one of the biggest stars of the 1970s, thanks to her role on Charlie's Angels, her iconic red swimsuit poster, and her reputation as one of the most glamorous women in Hollywood. His father, Ryan O'Neal, was equally well known, starring in films like Love Story and Paper Moon. Together, they were a celebrity couple that attracted constant media attention. But while Redmond inherited his parents' fame, he also inherited their chaos. Farrah and Ryan had a stormy relationship filled with public breakups, reconciliations, and endless headlines about their fighting. The household Redmond grew up in was not one of stability and calm. Instead, it was filled with dysfunction, with his parents' struggles often overshadowing his own needs as a child. For many children of Hollywood stars, fame is both a blessing and a curse. The opportunities are endless, but the pressures are suffocating. Redmond grew up under constant scrutiny, compared to his famous parents, and expected to carry on their legacy. But instead of encouragement and guidance, he often received chaos, neglect, and exposure to the darker side of Hollywood: drugs, violence, and unstable relationships. Even as a young boy, Redmond seemed destined to struggle. Friends of the family described him as shy, awkward, and often lost in the glare of his parents' troubled fame. The shadows that surrounded Ryan and Farrah would soon consume their son as well. Farrah's fierce love. Despite the turmoil of her relationship with Ryan O'Neal, Farrah Fawcett adored her son. Those close to her said that Redmond was the center of her world, the one constant in a life that was otherwise chaotic. She was protective of him, deeply concerned about his well-being, and often tried to shield him from the dysfunction around them. Farrah's maternal instincts were strong, and she believed that no matter what happened with Ryan, Redmond deserved to feel loved and supported. But even Farrah struggled to give him the stability he needed. Her career kept her busy. Her relationship with Ryan was turbulent, and her own life was full of pressures that distracted her from providing Redmond with a steady foundation. Still, she fought for him. Friends recalled how Farrah often defended her son, insisting that beneath his troubles was a kind and gentle soul. She never stopped believing that he could turn his life around, even as he began to show signs of following a darker path. When Farrah was diagnosed with cancer in 2006, Redmond was already in trouble with the law. Yet, even while battling for her life, she worried more about him than herself. In her final years, her biggest fear was not dying, but leaving Redmond without her guidance. She confided to friends that she did not know who would look after him once she was gone. That fear turned out to be justified. Farrah's fierce love could not save Redmond from his demons, and after her death, he spiraled even further out of control. Ryan O'Neal's influence. If Farrah Fawcett was remembered as the protective mother, then Ryan O'Neal stood as the volatile father. His reputation was split between Hollywood triumphs and personal disasters. On the screen, Ryan was charming, charismatic, and immensely talented. He starred in hits like Love Story and carved out a name for himself as a leading man. Off screen. However, his life was a minefield of broken relationships, temper flare-ups, and fractured family bonds. He had children from multiple marriages, and most of those relationships were scarred by estrangement and bitterness. To say that Ryan was not a model father would be to soften the truth. For Redmond, being Ryan O'Neal's son was both a blessing and a curse. On the surface, it meant being born into the glittering world of Hollywood royalty. Red carpets, celebrity circles, and wealth were constants in his early life. Redmond had access to opportunities most children could only dream of. Yet with those privileges came a darker inheritance, the chaos and instability that defined Ryan's personal world. Ryan had never mastered his own demons, and those struggles inevitably spilled over into his parenting. Ryan himself admitted, sometimes with regret, that he had not been the best father. In candid interviews, he spoke of how his temper and his inability to balance career and family had harmed his children. He acknowledged that his personal battles with drugs and volatile behavior made it nearly impossible to offer Redmond the kind of stable guidance he desperately needed. Their relationship was not one of gentle advice and supportive encouragement. Instead, it was an unpredictable cycle of affection and anger, of moments of closeness quickly undone by outbursts or disappointments. The O'Neal household was no ordinary home. It was not filled with quiet family dinners or long talks of reassurance. Instead, it was marked by tension and instability. Shouting matches echoed through the halls. Arguments often escalated into full-blown fights. Drugs were never far from reach. The atmosphere was one of constant drama, the kind of environment that chips away at a child's sense of safety and belonging. For Redmond, this instability bred confusion and resentment. He idolized both of his parents, seeing them as larger-than-life figures, but he also felt trapped by their legacies. Instead of being lifted by their fame, he felt smothered by it. Ryan's influence on his son was a complicated one. There were moments when he tried to step up as a father. He attended court hearings, made statements of support, and expressed concern over Redmond's choices. But these moments were often overshadowed by the dysfunction that defined their relationship. Critics of Ryan have argued that he was simply too consumed by his own struggles to be the father Redmond needed. Instead of offering stability, he became another source of turmoil. The tragedy of their bond was that Redmond desperately needed a steady hand, but Ryan, for all his intentions, was rarely capable of being that hand. For Redmond, his father's volatile influence was like a storm that never fully passed. It shaped his worldview, molded his insecurities, and deepened the struggles that would later define his life. Growing up in the O'Neal household was not just about living under fame's bright lights. It was about surviving the shadows those lights cast, early struggles with addiction. Redmond's downward spiral did not begin in adulthood. His troubles started in his teenage years, when he was first exposed to drugs. Hollywood, with its permissive culture and easy access to dangerous substances, provided fertile ground for addiction. Unlike other kids his age, Redmond did not have to hunt far to find trouble. The means were already there, surrounding him. At first, drugs seemed to offer him a kind of escape for a boy growing up in the pressure cooker of Hollywood. Constantly compared to his famous parents and trapped in a volatile household, substances provided a false sense of relief. But what began as experimentation quickly transformed into dependency. By his late teens, Redmond was already locked into a cycle that would come to define much of his adult life. Rehabilitation centers became revolving doors. In and out he went, sometimes by court order, sometimes by desperate family intervention. Farrah, heartbroken, tried to save her son. She pushed him into treatment programs, hoping each time that this would be the turning point. She longed to see the sweet, gentle side of Redmond that appeared when he was sober. The side that loved animals, that showed artistic promise, that seemed capable of finding a healthier path. But each glimpse of hope was short-lived. Ryan's approach was often harsher. His anger over his son's addiction sometimes manifested as discipline, but it rarely produced results. Instead, it widened the gap between them. Where Farrah offered compassion, Ryan offered frustration. Redmond was caught between the two, unable to rise above his dependency no matter how much love or discipline was applied. The addiction quickly spiraled into legal trouble. Arrest after arrest piled up, most involving heroin, cocaine, or methamphetamine. Courtrooms, probation officers, and jail cells became as much a part of Redmond's life as family gatherings. His rap sheet grew thicker, each charge reflecting a deeper descent into chaos. It was a cycle that played out in public, reported in tabloids, dissected by the media, and mourned quietly by those who cared for him. What made Redmond's addiction particularly tragic was not just the substances themselves, but the way they seemed to strip him of his potential. Friends and acquaintances often spoke of his gentle nature when sober. They described a young man who had artistic talents, who loved animals, and who displayed flashes of kindness and humor. But drugs drowned out that version of him. The more he used, the more volatile he became. Addiction made him paranoid, unstable, and at times violent. Every step forward was followed by a crushing relapse, and each relapse seemed worse than the last. Rehabilitation could not hold him. Jail could not reform him. His parents' love could not rescue him. The cycle was relentless, and it took from him not just his freedom, but also his identity. The gentle young man was replaced by someone unrecognizable, someone defined not by his gifts but by his dependencies. By the time Redmond reached his 20s, it was clear that addiction had its claws deep in him. His early struggles were not the typical rebellions of youth. They were the beginnings of a lifelong battle that would consume his future. For Redmond O'Neal, the tragedy was not just that he fell into addiction. It was that he never truly found a way out, trouble with the law. As Redmond's addiction grew, so did his criminal record. He was arrested multiple times for drug possession, probation violations, and even armed robbery. His behavior became increasingly erratic, and he often lashed out violently. At one point, he was accused of holding up a convenience store at knife point, a shocking fall from grace for the son of Hollywood icons. The legal system seemed unsure how to handle him. Judges ordered rehab, then jail, then probation, but nothing worked. Redmond himself admitted in court that he was out of control. His mugshots became tabloid fodder, plastered across magazines and websites, a grim reminder of how far he had fallen. For Farrah, seeing her son in handcuffs was devastating. For Ryan, it was frustrating, but also, in a way, familiar. His family had long been plagued by dysfunction. Redmond's legal troubles became a defining feature of his life, overshadowing any chance of building a normal career or identity outside of his parents' fame. Farrah's death and its impact. When Farrah Fawcett lost her battle with cancer in 2009, the world mourned. She was only 62, and her passing was felt deeply across Hollywood and beyond. For Redmond, her death was catastrophic. Farrah had been his anchor, the one person who consistently believed in him despite his mistakes. Losing her left him adrift. Redmond was actually in jail when his mother passed away. He was allowed to attend her funeral in shackles, escorted by guards. The image of Farrah's only son, bound and broken, mourning his mother from behind chains, was one of the most tragic moments of the entire saga. It symbolized the depths of his struggles and the devastating impact of his mother's loss. Friends said Redmond never recovered from Farrah's death. Without her, he had no stability, no voice urging him to do better. Ryan tried in his own flawed way to step in, but their relationship was too strained to fill the void. Farrah's death marked the point of no return for Redmond. Whatever chance he had of turning his life around seemed to vanish with her, escalating violence. In the years after Farrah's death, Redmond's behavior grew even more disturbing. His drug use continued, but it was accompanied by violent outbursts that shocked those around him. He was accused of attacking strangers, threatening people with weapons, and even attempting armed robbery. These were not minor crimes, they were serious, dangerous actions that put others at risk. Redmond's mugshots told the story of his decline. Each one showed a man more haunted, more broken, and more lost than the last. His once boyish features became hardened by drugs and time in jail. He seemed to have lost touch with reality, consumed entirely by his addiction and his rage. The public, once sympathetic to his struggles as the son of Farrah Fawcett, began to see him as just another Hollywood tragedy. The son of a star, destroyed by the very fame and privilege that should have made his life easier. For Redmond, there seemed to be no way out. Mental health struggles. Behind Redmond O'Neal's long battle with addiction and violence lay an even darker and more complicated reality: his struggles with mental illness. From his teenage years onward, Redmond was repeatedly diagnosed with serious psychiatric conditions. At different points in his life, doctors labeled him with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and severe depression. These diagnoses, while offering some explanation for his erratic behavior, also complicated his treatment. His attorneys often argued in court that what Redmond truly needed was not another prison sentence but comprehensive psychiatric care. More than once, judges agreed, ordering him into mental health facilities rather than jail cells. Yet the cycle of relapse, self-destruction, and violence always found a way to begin again. Mental illness, when left untreated or inconsistently treated, can destabilize even the strongest individual. For someone like Redmond, already burdened by the weight of addiction, celebrity lineage, and personal trauma, it created a perfect storm. He often confessed in rare interviews that he felt lost, cursed even by the shadow of his parents' fame. Farrah Fawcett and Ryan O'Neal were icons of their generation, household names whose faces adorned magazine covers and movie screens. For Redmond, their towering reputations became suffocating. He admitted that he resented constantly being compared to them, feeling like he could never live up to their legacies. In his words, he was doomed to be seen as a failure before he ever had the chance to prove himself. This resentment bred isolation. Instead of carving out his own identity, Redmond retreated further into the comfort of drugs, the numbness of violence, and the escape of denial. Mental illness made it difficult for him to form lasting connections, and his paranoia often led him to lash out at those who tried to help. What looked to the public like another celebrity child spiraling into addiction was, in truth, a young man battling demons that were never properly addressed. The tragedy of Redmond's mental health struggles lies not only in his diagnosis, but in the failure of systems, both personal and institutional, to provide consistent help. He bounced endlessly between jails, rehabilitation centers, and psychiatric hospitals. Each offered temporary solutions, but none provided a long-term, structured plan that could have stabilized his life. The criminal justice system often treats mental illness as a side note rather than a core issue, and Redmond became an example of this neglect. One moment he was punished as a criminal, the next he was pitied as a patient. The lack of consistency left him stuck in limbo. Even his family, for all their wealth and resources, could not save him. Farrah's battle with cancer consumed her final years, and Ryan's own troubled history limited his ability to intervene. Friends and relatives occasionally tried to step in, but Redmond pushed them away, consumed by paranoia and mistrust. In the end, he stood alone, a man whose mind betrayed him, whose addictions poisoned him, and whose famous last name haunted him. The most painful truth is that Redmond's mental health was never fully addressed. The system failed him. His family, fractured and wounded, failed him. And tragically, he failed himself by refusing the few lifelines that were extended. His story stands as a grim reminder of what happens when mental illness is left untreated, when fame becomes a burden instead of a gift, and when a life never finds its balance. The cycle of jail and rehab. By the time Redmond O'Neal entered his 30s, his life had become a revolving door of jail cells, courtrooms, and rehabilitation facilities. His rap sheet grew thicker with every year. Burglary, assault, drug possession, probation violations. Each arrest was followed by another chance at redemption, another opportunity for treatment. But none of them ever seemed to stick. Judges, lawyers, and therapists alike grew frustrated with the pattern. Redmond would enter rehab with promises of change, only to relapse weeks later. He would leave jail with vows of sobriety, only to reoffend in a matter of months. Probation became a cycle of disappointment. Each violation piled onto the last, digging him deeper into the system. His violent crimes, often committed under the influence, ensured that he spent more time behind bars than outside of them. For a man with so many chances, his inability to break free felt both tragic and inevitable. Occasionally, Redmond would show glimmers of clarity. In court, during tearful statements, he admitted that he had wasted his life. He acknowledged that he had disgraced his mother's memory, that he had squandered the opportunities afforded to him, and that he was powerless against his addictions. These moments of raw honesty often moved those present, suggesting that somewhere beneath the chaos was a man who truly wanted to change. Yet these confessions were fleeting. Once released, the pull of drugs and the weight of mental illness drowned out his good intentions. For the public, Redmond became a symbol of wasted potential. The tragic Hollywood cautionary tale. Here was the son of two of the most famous stars of the 1970s, reduced to a life defined by crime, drugs, and despair. Every mugshot, every court appearance, every headline reinforced the same narrative: that Redmond O'Neal was not destined to live up to his parents' legacies, but to become a tragic footnote in them. There was a sense of inevitability in the way his life unfolded. Fans of Farrah Fawcett often shook their heads at news of his latest arrest, wondering how her son could fall so far. Others pointed fingers at Ryan O'Neal, blaming his volatile parenting and troubled past for Redmond's instability. Some blamed the system, others blamed Hollywood, and many simply blamed Redmond himself. In truth, responsibility rested in all of these places. The cycle of jail and rehab became the defining feature of his adult life. Instead of building a career, a family, or a legacy, Redmond built a record, one of relapse, regret, and ruin. He lived in the shadow of parents who had captivated the world, yet his own story became one of captivity, shackled by mental illness, trapped by addiction, and imprisoned by his own choices. The tragedy is not just that Redmond failed to escape the cycle, but that no one, not the courts, not the clinics, not even his family, could break it for him. His life became a slow motion collapse, a headline waiting to be written, and a legacy not of fame but of failure. The weight of Farrah's legacy, one of the heaviest burdens Redmond O'Neal has carried throughout his life, is being the son of Farrah Fawcett, a woman who, for millions, will always be remembered as radiant, untouchable, and iconic. Wherever Redmond went, people saw not him but Farrah's son. That constant comparison only deepened his feelings of inadequacy. How could he ever live up to someone whose smile defined an entire era, whose image was immortalized on posters, and whose career represented the pinnacle of Hollywood success? Instead of motivating him, her legacy became suffocating. Friends say Redmond often resented the fact that people only valued him for his parents' fame. He wanted his own identity, but every failure, every relapse, every headline only tied him tighter to Farrah's name. In the end, her brilliance cast a shadow too large for him to escape. A family of broken bonds, Redmond's tragedy cannot be separated from the wider dysfunction of the O'Neal family. Ryan O'Neal's other children, Tatum, Griffin, and Patrick, all shared stories of estrangement, anger, and fractured relationships with their father. Redmond grew up watching these rifts play out, internalizing the chaos as normal. The O'Neal name, instead of representing a legacy of strength, became a symbol of broken bonds. Farrah's illness and death only made things worse, leaving Redmond without her protective love and deepening his sense of isolation within a family already scarred by conflict. He was not just a troubled man. He was part of a dynasty defined as much by heartbreak as by fame. His struggles are not only personal but generational, a reminder of how unhealed wounds can pass from parent to child until they finally consume a life. Where he stands now. Today, Redmond O'Neal remains a cautionary tale. He is no longer seen as the child of glamorous parents, but as a broken man consumed by his demons. He has spent years in jail and psychiatric facilities, and his future remains uncertain. Some still hope he can turn his life around, but many believe it may be too late. What is clear is that his story is not just about personal failure. It is about the dangers of fame, the impact of dysfunctional parenting, and the devastating power of addiction and mental illness. Redmond never had the stability he needed, and even the fierce love of Farrah Fawcett could not protect him from the chaos around him. The new details of his life only deepen the tragedy. He was given every opportunity, yet he is a man defined by loss, violence, and wasted potential. For fans of Farrah, it is heartbreaking to think that her legacy includes not only her iconic work but also the tragedy of her only son.